The left will never stop their agenda to take over America. You are their enemy, and they will not negotiate. Prepare yourselves. Welcome to the Blue Shark Show with your host, Mike Lang.
Well, it's that time of year again, Nate.
What time's that, Mike?
It's GISD bond time.
Oh, no, not again.
The Granbury Independent School District will be having another bond on the ballot, and they sent out a survey, so we can talk about that later, too. Why don't you kind of fill us in and fill the people in on what is going on with the bond this year?
So they've called two elections for this November in addition to the school board trustee elections that are taking place. It's super important that everybody goes to vote, and what the ballot propositions are. One is a school bond to the tune of about $151 million. Now, unlike the last bond that was split into two propositions where they had the stadium on one and kind of everything else on the other, which lost miserably, about 72% of the people voted against that. This time they did all or nothing, and they're saying it's for this elementary school, which we do need an elementary school unless they get the administrators out of the admin building and turn that back into a school. But we need an elementary school, and I wished that they would have put that elementary school as its own proposition. I'd have been a lot more inclined to support something like that, but they, in their typical GISD fashion, have done all or nothing. Now, in addition to the elementary school, there are renovations that are going on at basically all the campuses around GISD. Unfortunately, none of those renovations include increasing capacity, at least according to the district's own website, where they have a breakdown of kind of what to expect. Now, the other ballot proposition is a voter-approved tax rate election, or as I like to call it, a tax increase election. Now, the district right now is telling everybody that, this is actually a property tax decrease. You know, we're decreasing the tax rate. That's not exactly true.
No, it's not. And I know you've been doing a lot of work on this, and this is where the state comes in and all the billions of dollars that have been spent and will be spent here in the future on public education. So can you kind of, and I know we're breaking away from the bond a little bit, but kind of explain where that state money comes in and how it affects Granbury ISD and all the ISDs in Texas.
Sure. So the state of Texas had a giant surplus in sales tax revenue, and they chose to put at least a portion of this into buying down the property tax bills for people's school taxes. So everyone knows that school taxes historically have been the largest portion of the property tax bill. Districts like Granbury ISD have been begging the state for years to buy that down so people can have lower property tax bills and they can fund more of the government from the sales tax, as I think a lot of people want, right? I mean, who's against abolishing property taxes or at least putting us on that path? Now, instead of just taking that cut, not to the district, but allowing that cut to go to the property owners, the district instead has decided to call this tax increase election, which will negate most, if not all, of that property tax relief that the people have been begging for and the districts have been begging for years.
Surprise, surprise, right?
What?
The state brings it down and the locals raise it up, and it seems to be you can never balance it where both bring it down at the same time.
Well, they could if they would start following the Republican Party of Texas platform. That's where a lot of that comes into play, you know, and to GISD's credit, they did at least have this election in November. Now, it's a November and an off year where, you know, maybe not as many people show up as they would next November. But that aside, you know, we do have some serious stuff on the ballot, and the voters need to be aware of what they will be voting on.
If you look at the buy down from the state, which is still all our taxes, right? State tax, federal, local, all of it. It's still the, you know, coming out of our pockets. So the state buys it down so many cents, and then now the district's going to raise it up, but not only are they going to raise it up, they're going to tell you that they're not raising your taxes.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way they've chosen to justify this, but yeah, you're absolutely right. The state giveth and the local tyrants taketh away.
And that, you know, we're talking about the bond here, but we already owe a certain portion from the old bond that we're still paying off, correct?
Yeah, the last bond was about 10 years ago or so, and if memory recalls, it was about 90 million. I could be a little bit off there, and we still owe about 85 million on the last one. Now, we have had a lot more people move here since then, but the mismanagement of the administration and the breakdown of trust with the people has put us in this position. You know, if the voters trusted Granbury ISD the way you'd think we would, I mean, most of us are products of public education, myself included. But they mismanaged that last one so poorly, it was like, we don't trust you enough with $500 million a year and a half ago, and I'm having a hard time trusting them enough to even give them 151.
You know, their own people in GISD say that, you know, there's a trust issue in the community, then there's a problem and it needs to be fixed. And I think for me, that kind of starts with the superintendent. But we can get back on the bond, and we already owe something. Now we have another bond coming in. So we're probably looking at about $230 million in debt total if you add what we already owe.
Simply stated, voting for this bond will triple the debt of Granbury ISD. And they're telling us that it's not going to be a tax increase. I don't understand how you can, with a straight face, tell somebody, hey, I'm going to triple your debt, but don't worry, I'm not going to raise your taxes.
And that goes back to why, you know, the state spent all this, you know, money on trying to buy down so they can lower your property tax rate. And now the ISD is going to raise it up to the level where they can say, see, we're not increasing your taxes. So that's that shell game that I think is played between the state and your local ISDs.
Another game that's being played here locally is the way that they put this out. Now, everyone remembers, and I think we covered in a show previously where Dr. Glenn was caught on that recording because his employees don't trust him and they record him every time he's around, where he said, hey, we couldn't tell you before the last bond, and I won't be able to tell you after we call this bond, but, you know, we were going to give you a 10% raise. Well, that got leaked out and it hit the media, and then now instead of building it into the bond, they called this tax increase election. And I find it interesting that even though the GISD staff, most of them are looking at a pretty hefty raise, only 66% of Granbury ISD staff support these measures.
And, you know, what you're talking about now is the GISD survey results that came out from a survey that they had put out through the GISD, through all their employees, correct?
Yes.
And can you go over some of the questions they asked?
Sure. In campaigns, we would call this something like a push poll. It's a survey that's designed to kind of push people or nudge people in a certain direction. And at the convocation before this school year started, all staff, which is about 1,200, received a yellow slip of paper. And on that yellow slip of paper, it asked, are you a registered voter? How many registered voters are in your household? How many extended family members do you know that live in the district? Would you support this bond so we can do blah, blah, blah? Would you support this tax increase election so we can give you a raise? And at the end of it, it says, well, if you don't support these, would you mind telling us why? Now, knowing the culture of fear and intimidation that exists within Granbury ISD, that seems a little coercive to me, and under Texas election code, they may have actually violated the law in that regard.
And I could see where it definitely pushes the limits of violating that, going out, and they even did, you fill this out, and when you fill it out, you get a free lunch from several local entities, which is great, you know, shop local, buy local, I get that. But they kind of use it as a free meal ticket once you fill out the survey.
And they also, as it pertains to Texas election code, we're using district resources to influence positively in their favor the election. You cannot use district resources for election purposes. That's called electioneering. Dr. Glenn himself should know something about that with his history in Waxahachie ISD, but that's a story for another day.
So when you did the information request through GISD to get the results of the survey, What they sent you was everybody that participated, how many they received. Did anything else stand out to you that was a little bit kind of, hey, what's wrong with this?
Yeah, so I found it interesting that while there are about 1,200 staff members and almost all of them were present on the day of convocation, they only received back 1,042 surveys. Now, why would somebody not want to turn that survey in? Because they're worried that somebody would find out who that was and they would be retaliated against. They'd be targeted for, putting their job on the line, basically. So if we extrapolate that out, I think that 66 number, that would bring it closer down to about the 60% of staff approval rate. And then when you also factor in that they had to turn that slip into district administrator, and the district administrator can see right there on the front whether they say yes or no, I would bet that number is probably closer down to 55, maybe even 50. And when that should be pretty telling, because they're waving a hefty raise in front of them, and it's been proven through actions and all these recordings of Dr. Glenn that the district doesn't trust them. If their own employees, that many of their own employees don't trust them, and we know how many of the voters don't trust them, I don't know how good of a chance this has, but we all still have to turn out and send a strong message that we are not ready to trust the district at this juncture with $151 million in this set of circumstances.
So what you're saying is, because of the way they did this survey, the way they put it out, the free lunch portion of it, doing it all in public, it probably skews it more to their favor.
Absolutely. So I think Granbury ISD has demonstrated that there is a lack of trust there, and the voters have voiced their lack of trust with the district, and that's why it's going to be important for there to be an organized effort against this bond. So what are we going to do about this bond? I think you and I both agree that this bond package is not very good for the taxpayers, and just like last time, I tried to help them. I spent 2 full days in the month of June with the district trying to show them, hey, if you do it like this, I think the voters would approve it. One thing I said was if you have the elementary school as its own proposition, that would probably pass. If you keep the whole thing under $100 million, that would probably pass. If you prioritize the needs rather than the wants, that would probably pass. Again, the district is all or nothing. They're not listening. They don't care to listen. It's their way or the highway. So in the coming days, I'll be announcing a PAC. I've actually been given a little bit of time at the upcoming Hood County Republican Club meeting that is this Tuesday, and I'll be giving a presentation there as well. I will be soliciting donations all here locally so we can send a strong message to the leadership at the administration building of Granbury ISD that says, let's be more reasonable and let's not undo the good property tax relief that the state gave us.
We look at this bond, and I go back and I look at the last bond they did, and under the circumstances, it wasn't. They think they did a great job putting it out there. I just didn't trust the whole thing with the amount of money. Hey, give us some money, we'll spend it on something later. We'll let you know what we're going to do, type thing. I think the elementary school would have been great as a separate entity on the ballot. But you look at the trust from the last bond attempt, and you look at the plain story, that we went through on that. And then you look at the books, and you look at the own administration saying there's trust issues. I think we have to fix the trust issues, and I like what you said earlier about wants and needs. And I think they need to go back to what is really needed instead of what they really want, especially in today's time, in the way everything is in the economy.